Hello, everybody, and welcome to Box Seat Banter. I'm your host, Billy Ballas, and this week we are talking about the Baltimore Orioles. So since we're talking about the Orioles, joining me is Nick Cesari, a writer for our Camden Chat, writing about the Orioles, and Pitcher List, where he is more fantasy baseball oriented. And Nick, we are here on Utah Street, right between the warehouse and Camden Field. Nick, welcome to the program. Glad to have you here.
Hey, Billy, I appreciate you having me on, man. Like I just mentioned to you before, any chance I get to talk O's, I'll jump on it. My favorite thing in the world. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here and excited to talk about the Orioles with you. Looking back at the Orioles, they were one of the original American League teams back in 1901. They were actually the Milwaukee Brewers for a year in 01. Then they moved to St. Louis. They were the Browns in St. Louis from 02 to 1953, kind of the second fiddle there in St. Louis to the Cardinals. They actually almost moved to LA. They would have been the first team in LA, first team kind of really west of where they were. They were all set to announce their move to LA in, I think, December of 1941. But then Pearl Harbor happened like the day before their planned announcement, and that kind of halted that. So they ended up staying in St. Louis through 1953, but then they moved to Baltimore in 54 to become the Baltimore Orioles, and that's where they've been ever since. And they play at beautiful Oriole Park at Camden Yards. They've been there since 1992. Nick, beautiful park, Camden Yards, don't you think?
Oh, it's exactly what people describe it to be. I remember the first time I went when I was a kid, you see the big warehouse, and the warehouse, it ties everything together, I think, just where it's situated and the historical side of it as well. And now when you go out there, you walk through the Monument Park out there beyond center field, where they have statues of Frank Robinson, Earl Weaver, Brooksy, Cal Ripken, Eddie Murray, just Jim Palmer. It's just a beautiful place to watch a game. And ever since I was a kid, the first time I went, I don't think I could ever say that there's a better park to attend a baseball game at.
Yeah, that warehouse, beautiful backdrop there. I mean, it was so iconic, like the numbers that they had as Ripken was getting close to breaking the record, the 2-1-3-0 hanging there, Griffey hitting the warehouse in the home run derby. And I love all the plaques they have on Utah Street of home runs that have landed there. They got the player and the date in the distance. It's a nice touch. And you don't realize it because you think of like Camden Yards as, one of the newer parks. It kind of started that, revolution of that kind of retro ballpark, but it's, 1992, it's the 10th oldest park. It's crazy to think about it being, one of the older thirds in baseball.
I know it's crazy because it's only what was 1991, 1992.
Two it opened, yeah.
92. You think of, how many other, you hear about all these ballpark disputes, and you have all these different teams, trying to move and, upgrade their facility. But, Oriole Park being only 30 years, just having turned 30 years old is crazy. And you just said it's the 10th oldest park in baseball right now. And, the team's only been playing there for 30 years, for what, 25 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, I want to say Atlanta is like on their second park in that time period. I feel like Turner Field opened in like 96 and they just moved into
for the Olympics, right?
Yeah. Then now they just moved into that new stadium. But yeah, Camden Yards, it is it set the bar for what, the new stadiums can and should be. And I think it's still, in terms of that newer kind of retro style, it's still, the top stadium. Your Wrigley Fields, your Fenway, those are kind of a different category, those old ones. But yeah, Camden Yards has set the bar for, what a stadium can and should be.
Yeah, I see whenever I like to read the lists whenever I see a list come out. And I always see PNC Park is typically the number one. I haven't been, but seen it on TV. It obviously looks gorgeous. With the city skyline and the bridge right there in the back. Having lived in Colorado for a long time, I've been to Coors Field a bunch, and I think it's incredibly underrated. But again, it's I'm biased. I'll admit it. It is what it is. But at the same time, I think even though I am biased, I would say that there's a lot of evidence to support that, that Camden Yards is without a doubt the funnest and visually pleasing place to go see a game.
Yeah. And playing there in Camden Yards, the going back to 1995 in this time period that we look at, that past quarter century, the Orioles have won the AL East in 97 and 2014. They've also won the wild card in 96, 2012, and 2016. They do not have an AL pennant in this time frame. They have 7 total. And I think, the big glaring omission there is, 1996 and what could have been. Do Oriole fans are they still mad at that no call there in 96?
Oh yeah, you can't say Jeffrey Mayer without a little backlash. It's what's even funnier is now we've got instant replay and all this stuff and all this technology in the ballparks, and there's no way that ball, Tony Tarasco would have caught that ball.
Oh, absolutely.
Or at the very least, you get an interference call, that whole series changes. It's still it's not enough time has passed. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, at the time he was like a 12-year-old kid. He's doing probably what anyone would have. He's going for a ball. But everyone always hates the Yankees anyway. And I think that just added fuel for those 29 other fan bases. But then in New York, this kid was like a hero. Like he's on the talk show circuit. He's talking like, on Regis and Kathy Lee back in the day. And he was like a hero there in New York. Whereas, Steve Bartman was like reaching for a ball like in the stands. And, he was he had to go in the witness protection program basically. So
yeah, I know. I remember, the Moises Alou play, that you're talking about with Bartman. That was such I'm not convinced that was even a routine play. And right. I think, like Meyer and Bartman, you're just, as a fan, you're just kind of doing the natural thing, which is, holy crap, there's a ball coming at me. I'm going to try to catch it. And, I don't blame him whatsoever. It's just kind of a in the moment thing, but it is kind of crazy. It is funny thinking about the discrepancy in the two and how they were treated. And I remember, the Bartman the ESPN 30 for 30 is one of my favorites, just because you kind of get the background of it. And him getting basically shuttled out of the stadium like he was, like you said, like he was someone that the CIA had just picked up and they were trying to get him out of there. It was very, 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 very unique.
So yeah, that happened in Game 1 of the '96 NLCS. It was in the 8th inning, a 1-run game. It tied the game. The Yankees went on to win in extras. I think the O's got Game 2, so they could have had a 2-0 lead. Ended up losing at 5 games. So yeah, what could have been? So no AL pennants in this time frame. So of course, no World Series in this time frame either. They have 3 total: 1966, 1970, and 1983. And then they've got some retired numbers. I think you mentioned all of these guys talking about the Monument Park there with the statues. Number 4 retired for Earl Weaver. 5 for the great Brooks Robinson, 8 for Cal Ripken Jr., of course. Number 20 for Frank Robinson, 22 for Jim Palmer, and number 33 for Eddie Murray, all these Hall of Famers. And then, of course, number 42, retired for Jackie Robinson, all throughout baseball. Who do you think is Ripken the franchise icon, or is it Brooks Robinson?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think just because Cal played, 20 plus years in the same with the same team in the state and area that he was from, the Ripkens are kind of viewed as the baseball royalty. I mean, they're like you can't really talk about baseball in Baltimore without talking about the Ripkens. And I think if you went and asked a pool of Orioles fans, I think you'd get a pretty strong Ripken majority. But Brooks would be a very, 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 very slim second.
Okay.
I think I can't remember the exact quote, but they said, the saying goes that, people don't, people name their kids after Brooks because that's how much he meant to the city, and he still does. He still does a little bit of work with the team when he can, even though he's getting up there in age, unfortunately. But yeah, I would have to say Ripken just to be safe.
Yeah, they both definitely have a strong case. Can't go wrong with either one. But yeah, I mean, from an outsider, I think Ripken. So yeah, that's some of the important info about the Orioles, and then we'll get into some of the personnel coming right up here. Time for the trivia question here. And before we get into the O's trivia question, I've got last week's trivia question about the Twins. Nick, I know you're not a Twins guy, but I'll see if you can answer it before I give the answer. The Twins, as we mentioned on the show last episode, they've got the longest postseason losing streak currently. I think they've lost like 18 consecutive postseason games. So the last game that they won was back in 2004. And who was the winning pitcher for the Twins in that game?
Winning pitcher for the Twins back in 2004. It's not, I don't want to say it's too obvious and say like Johan Santana.
So you don't want to say Johan?
I don't. I kind of want to. Is it Johan Santana?
It is Johan.
It is Johan Santana.
And Denny Hawking had the correct answer on that one last week as well. So yeah, Johan. It's sometimes you might think too obvious, but that one was definitely the case. Johan got the win there. I think it was game 1, I want to say, against the Yankees, and then they lost the next 3. So that brings us to this week's trivia question. So one of the most iconic games that the Orioles played in the past quarter century was back in 95. I think it was September 6th, 95, when Cal Ripken broke Lou Gehrig's record playing in his 2000th 131st straight game. Can you name the starters for the Orioles the night that Ripken broke the record?
Oh, man.
So we got 10 of them, including the DH. How many? So who do you got?
Let's see. I'm going to start off with, just to be safe, Rafael Palmeiro, I'm sure, was on the field.
Okay. And again, so I'm not going to say whether you're right or wrong. I'll reveal the answer next week, as we always do. And listeners, if you want to chime in with your guesses, it's on the honor system because obviously you can look it up. But you can chime in on social media at Boxseat Banter on both Twitter and Instagram. Okay, so you're going Palmeiro at first.
Palmeiro at first. Back in 95, I was a 4-year-old little guy, so I'm gonna go based on just pure knowledge, pure brain power, and maybe get lucky. But at that time, Brady Anderson would have been in center field.
Okay.
The outfield is going to be a little iffy. I think Eddie Murray was back on the team by then, but I don't know if he was DHing or maybe I'm going to say he was. I'm going to throw Eddie's name out there just because I can.
Okay, so what? Eddie Murray at DH.
Yeah, I'd say Eddie Murray DH because he was probably on his last legs at that point. Charles Johnson, I would say likely was catching.
Okay.
I think they kind of had a bit of a platoon at that point. Let's see. Mike Bordick, I believe, was at shortstop. And second base is going to be a little iffy. Roberto Alomar might have been on the team at that point. And then starting on the mound is going to be an absolute blur. I wouldn't be able to tell you.
That's a tough one because it's even if you know who the starters are, you got like a 1 in 5 shot unless you specifically remember the game.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are going to be my guesses. That, like I said, I was just a little guy, but just based on names that I would imagine were on the team around that time, those are going to be mine.
Okay. Well, any guesses we still got third base open, pitcher, left, right?
Third base. Oh man.
Well, you also think about, well, I mean, and I don't know if you want to change one of your position guesses, but this is the starting lineup tonight. Ripken broke the record, so someone's got to be in the lineup.
So obviously Cal's there, man in the hot corner.
Okay.
So what are we missing? Second base and
you got Robbie Alomar at second,
Robbie
so we need right, left, and pitcher.
Right, left, and pitcher. I'm just going to throw out Musina's name just because I can.
Okay.
I can't really recall who would have been on the staff at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a historical struggle for my entire life, so I'm sure it's some name I wouldn't even know. And then left field, who would have been on the team at that point? Man, that's tough.
Yeah, left field. I'm gonna be honest. The left field, I don't even recognize this name.
Then it's probably tough. And
the right field, right field is definitely a name that baseball fans know.
Would have been maybe Bobby Bonilla at that point.
Okay.
We'll say Bobby.
Okay.
Maybe Albert Bell. I can't remember when Albert Bell signed that contract. Left field back in 1995. Wish I could call my dad as a lifeline at this point.
All right. Well, you want to throw Albert Bell as a guess for left field?
I will. Let's do that.
Okay. So I won't say. Again, I won't reveal the answers, but I will say you got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got 4.5 because you got 5 names correct, but 1 incorrect position.
I'll take that.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty impressive there, especially for, being 4. I remember watching the game. I was about 10.5 at the time, I guess. And it was huge moment in baseball. It was like on ESPN, obviously everyone was counting down, waiting for it. And, I remember after, in the middle of the 5th inning, Ripken taking the lap around, high-fiving everyone in the stands. It was a great moment for baseball. But
yeah, one of the cool things that the Orioles social media team this last year, with the pandemic and, just not having a lot of content to put out, they did these cool little like throwback, videos. They were maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes long, and they did a really good, they broke down, they kind of gave some behind the scenes access from, from guys that were there. And, they had one where they asked Ryan Miner, like, what was it like following up Cal and all these different things. And so it was really like, just having seen those clips that they put together, kind of refreshed my memory as well as showed me things I hadn't seen before. And like you said, it really puts into perspective just how significant that was, with the numbers coming off the warehouse and everything. It was just, if ESPN was at Oriole Park, then that means it was a big deal, or, because they're hardly ever there.
So now let's look at some of the bigwigs there for the Orioles. They've got a lot of stability here. Peter Angelos, going back to 1993. I know he's getting up there in age, but yeah, he's the owner, and I know he's one of the few owners I think his name is pretty recognizable. What do Orioles fans think of Angelos? How's he doing there?
So Peter Angelos has kind of gotten out of the picture. His two sons have really kind of taken the majority control of the organization. The Angelos name for most of my life has been tied with not nice words, just based on the hiring practices, the business practices, just kind of the Orioles, like, we talked about before, had didn't won a pennant in 97, won the division in 97, didn't win it again until 2014. So kind of, you go that long without being competitive in any kind of way, or, making bad business decisions. It's, it does leave a stench. And I would say that in general, the Angelos name is not something that people connect with in a great way. But the way the Orioles are now, I would say that if they could get a game on television, they're like the only team right now that won't broadcast the spring training game. So that's kind of been a bummer. But in general, I would say that the way that the way the two sons have operated thus far, I want to say probably the last couple of years is when they took over. The hiring of Mike Elias as general manager and all the new thinking, catching the organization up to speed with the way baseball is now has been a pleasant surprise. So growing up, obviously not great, but now that Peter's kind of out of the way and with his health and everything, the organization does seem like it's moving in a direction that it hasn't attempted, it hasn't attempted to move in the past. So it's been very encouraging, but in general, not great.
Yeah, they, as we'll look at here right now, he's gone through a lot of GMs in the past 25 years, which is usually not a good sign because he's, I don't know, hiring the wrong person to begin with, or not giving them a long enough leash to do their job. But because, if they're doing well, then basically you want those guys to stick around. But Pat Gillick was a GM there from 95 to 98. So some success there under Pat Gillick, the great GM. But then he left after 98. Frank Wren was there for just a couple years, 98, 99. Sid Thrift from 99 to 02. Jim Beattie from 02 to 05. Mike Flanagan from 05 to 07. Andy McPhail from 07 to 2011. So again, real short tenures for these GMs. Then Dan Duquette was there for a while, 2011 to 2018. And then the name you just mentioned, Mike Elias, has been there for the past couple of years, since 2018. So, a lot of these GMs didn't really have a long time to really build anything there. And I know you just mentioned, like the direction that the organization is going in under Elias. Do you have any thoughts on any of these other GMs?
Just based on me being a little kid for much of that time, the only guys I could really comment on would be McPhail, Duquette, and Elias. Andy McPhail kind of laid the groundwork for Dan Duquette and what became 3 playoff appearances and some really lovable teams. And I think he was with I know he was with the Phillies for a little while, and then I think he's retired now, McPhail. Dan Duquette is probably his aura in Baltimore is it's incredibly weird, because he went, Orioles fans know going into just about every year that they're not going to be paying top dollar they're not going to be going, dollar for dollar with the Yankees and the Red Sox and even the Blue Jays in the AL East. But Dan Duquette did a really, really awesome job of piecing together teams and finding value where other teams saw no value. JJ Hardy, to me, JJ Hardy was acquired from the Twins. I couldn't tell you the year, but I can tell you that JJ Hardy kind of was like the signal of what felt like a big change. He was acquired for reliever Jim Hoey, who never, ever saw. I think he might have seen the big leagues. He might have seen the big leagues, for a game or two, but they basically got JJ Hardy for nothing. And, after his Milwaukee days where he was awesome, he really kind of found that groove again with the Orioles. He was a Gold Glove shortstop, provided a steady bat with some pop there until kind of towards the end. Steve Pearce was picked up off of waivers. The Orioles even dumped him, brought him back, and he was one of the glue guys for that clubhouse for a few years. I can tell you people love Steve Pearce, and I think when he went over to the Red Sox and then he won a World Series, he was a World Series MVP. People love Steve Pearce, and I don't think a lot of teams would have seen the value in him. But Duquette, working under the constraints that he was, gave him a shot and ended up working out. Duquette did a lot of really signing Chris Davis to that massive contract when I think it was rumor has it that Peter Angelos kind of was like, hey, let's get this deal done. I don't really care what it takes. And that's kind of Angelos's, kind of intervening there as the owner. But Duquette did a lot of really good things without a lot of resources. And I think that gets lost, but there were also some things that he did that just never made sense. He traded, I want to say this would have been 15, the year before they won the wild card, trading Zach Davies for Gerardo Parra, which, Zach Davies is now a very steady Eddie starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. And those guys are hard to find. Doesn't matter, if you're looking for guys to eat innings with consistency and quality. And he does that for, most nights. And they kind of just made a trade just to make a trade. They made a trade just to make a trade, I should say. At that point, at the deadline, it didn't make sense. It just seemed like he was trying I'm not even really sure what he was trying to accomplish, but Duquette had his moments and he did a lot without a lot, I would say, and pieced together some really interesting and fun teams. But and McPhail too. McPhail traded Eric Bedard for guys that ended up for Adam Jones and Chris Tillman and George Sherrill and a couple other guys. But those guys helped lay the groundwork for what became the winningest franchise in the American League for 5 years until the luck kind of ran out and they had to restart with Elias, who is now, as I mentioned before, he's gotten the Orioles up to speed with what everyone else in Major League Baseball has been doing for years now. So it's nice to know that they're operating in a way that can help them compete with the rest of the league. So while they're losing now and they're losing, somewhat unpurposefully, but I like where they're headed. And I think Elias has a lot to do with that.
Yeah. And so let's look at some of their field managers in the past 25 years. I've got a little tidbit about them and see if you can identify the manager from the tidbit. And some of these may be pretty tough. I know a couple of these guys I've already had on the show. So I've been looking for different facts. So some of them are a little deeper than previous episodes. This first manager was kind of the vulture was created for him. I know we talk about a vulture wing for relievers. Well, he was nicknamed the Vulture because Sandy Koufax gave him that nickname. I think if Sandy Koufax gives you a nickname, it's, you keep that nickname. because he went 14-1 out of the pen for the Dodgers in 1966. Do you know who the Vulture is?
I'm going to take a guess and say Ray Miller.
Uh, Phil Reagan. So Phil Reagan was
Bill Reagan.
there.
Yeah. Bill Reagan would have been out of my scope.
He was there. He managed a team in 95. Their next manager has a bachelor's degree in mathematics, which you don't often see for baseball players. And he used that math degree to kind of help pioneer the use of sabermetrics as a manager.
Let's see, 1995. I want to say Davey Johnson.
Yeah, Davey Johnson. So he was there for a couple years, 96 and 97. Then their next manager, along with being a manager, he has had 3 separate stints as a pitching coach for the Orioles.
So I'm going to guess. I'm going to say that was Ray. That was Ray Miller, correct?
Yeah, Ray Miller. So a couple years as manager there, 98, 99. Then their next manager was the 1974 American League Rookie of the Year.
Oh, wow.
And this is another guy who I've already had on the show. I've used, I think, his best tidbit. Being a 74 AL Rookie of the Year, I want to say for the Rangers. And if you want another hint, the one that I used on his last episode as a player, he was nicknamed Human Rain Delay.
The Human Rain Delay. Oh man, I know it. It's somewhere back in my brain here. The Human Rain Delay would have been. Oh shoot! He also managed for the Indians. Oh God, I can't remember his name. You're gonna have to give it to me. I can't think of it.
Mike Hargrove. Yeah,
knew that.
And then, so he was there from 2003. After him, they had a guy who, as a junior, he won 8 speed skating national championships.
Oh my goodness. You said this was 0203, right?
Hargrove was there from 2003. So this guy was there after. Yeah.
I'm thinking time frame here. I want to say speed skating championships. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, that's impressive. You don't see many baseball players with speed skating background.
I'm going to say Lee Mazzilli.
Yep, Lee Mazzilli. I guess a speed skater as a child, as a junior. 04 to 05, he was the skipper. After him, I couldn't find a lot of information on this guy, but on the final day of the 1977 season, he was playing, I think, for the Twins. He was leading off, and Rod Carew was batting second. Carew was sitting on 99 RBIs going into the last game of the year, and the manager grabbed this player right before his first AB. He's like, hey, you got to hit a triple so that Carew can drive you in. And he goes up to the plate, and he hits a triple, and Carew drove him in for his 100th RBI. Do you know
that's an awesome story.
It is. Do you know who that guy is? So he was a manager after Mazzilli.
You said what year was that? I'm sorry.
Mazzilli was a manager from 04 to 05. That story occurred in 77.
Okay, so let's see. So we're talking. I'm going to say Dave Tremblay.
You skipped over Sam Perlazzo.
Sam Perlazzo. That's
Perlazzo
right.
Perlazzo was there 05 to 07. And then the guy you just mentioned, Tremblay, no professional baseball playing experience. He was a high school coach before getting into pro ball as a scout and then a minor league coach. So, I mean, not a common route to, being a big league manager. Most of those guys, most of them have played in the majors. Some have had longer careers than others, but the ones who didn't play in the majors generally at least played in the minors. But Dave Tremblay, no professional baseball playing experience. He was there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I was gonna say my dad is gonna be upset with me that I didn't name Sam Perlazzo, being as Italian as he is. That was big time screw up on my part.
Yeah. So Tremblay there, '07 to 2010. And okay, so I'm to interject with that, going back to the owners, I'm also Greek. So I don't know how I feel about sharing, the Greek bloodlines with Peter Angelos. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But after Tremblay, they had a manager who he also never made it to the majors, although he did play minor league ball, but never made it to the majors. But he was an All-American at Mississippi State, and he still has the single season record there for batting average when he hit 459 in 1977.
Yeah, that's going to be my guy, Buck Showalter, who in the Cicery household we hold very near and dear to our heart. So,
yeah, he was there 2010 to 08. He won the manager of the year there in 2014. He also won the manager of the year in 1994 and in 2004. So, I mean, he's not managing right now, I don't think, but maybe in a couple of years here in 2014, he'll win another manager of the year award.
Yeah, I was going to say the 10-year streak is coming up, so he's got to get a job here soon.
Yeah, and now their current manager, he was part of the Cubs rebuild as a bench coach and first base coach. He was with the Cubs from 2012 to 2018, so now he's kind of attempting to have the same success here with the Orioles.
Yeah, Brandon Hyde is like, every time I watch him do a press conference or talk with the media or so, I love the guy. He's just, he kind of knew what he was walking into when he took the job. Like, hey man, you guys are gonna stink, and it's not a job a lot of people wanted. And he said, you know what, I'll take it. And I think he's done an incredibly underrated job so far with the team that he's had for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it is definitely tough to navigate a team through that rebuild process as a manager. I think, as a GM, it's kind of easier because you're just there. You're kind of a little more distanced from the team, from being in the clubhouse and the dugout with them day to day. You can kind of from your high horse there up in the suite, you can orchestrate that. But as a manager, to be down there in the trenches with them, and you got to deal with all that and kind of manage the players and keep them in a positive frame of mind, it is tough to do when you don't necessarily have the talent to compete at that given time. Any other thoughts on any of these other managers? And you mentioned, some of them as we went along, but was there anything else you want to share about them?
No, I would just say that, Buck Showalter, being as special as he is to a lot of Orioles fans, watching him, after he was kind of asked to leave, was really rough because, he did so much, like Duquette, he did so much with so little, and he did such an awesome job of knowing and understanding his players and knowing when to play, how they were going to be successful. And the way he managed the Orioles bullpen, aside from the Ubaldo Jimenez game, which
that's right, yeah,
we'll talk about. But Buck Showalter, I think if he wanted to be back in baseball, I bet he could. But I do wonder if he's a little bit worn out, a little bit, just kind of enjoying being, back home. And I wish him well. But yeah, I don't know if Buck Showalter's impact is quite understood by people outside of Baltimore. It was what he did and the way he went about himself and the way he represented the team was top notch.
Maybe the Orioles thought getting rid of him would get them a World Series title, because I know he managed in New York, and I think he was fired after 95. But then Torrey comes in 96, and they win the World Series. And then Showalter managed in Arizona, and I think he got let go after 2000. And then Bob Brenly comes in 01 and wins the World Series the next year. So maybe the Orioles were just
yeah, even after he left New York early, knowing that he had this set up in Arizona, and they still canned him. It's just Poor guy could never catch a break.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the managers, and then coming right up, we'll look at the roster that I've assembled for the Orioles in the past 25 years. Nick, let's take a little walk down memory lane again as we look at this roster for the Baltimore Orioles, and a quick reminder on the rules for constructing these rosters. You go back 25 years. I know that rosters have expanded to 26, but I'm sticking with the 25-man roster. The time frame is 1995 to 2019. You pick one player per year. You get that version of the player. You cannot repeat players, and you must form a coherent roster. It's a fun little project, getting all these pieces of the puzzle to fit. And so we'll start off here at catcher. We've got Matt Wieters, the switch hitter, 2011. He was worth over 5 wins that year, hit 22 bombs, 28 doubles. He was an all-star and a gold glover there. A lot of value with the glove that year. At first base, Rafael Palmeiro from 98. He was worth 6.3 wins, 43 bombs, 36 doubles. Palmeiro even swiped 11 bags that year. He drove in 121, triple slash of 296, 379, 565. He was an all-star, gold glover, and a silver slugger. Brian Roberts at second base, the switch hitter from 05. He was worth over 7 wins, 45 doubles there for Roberts, 18 bombs, 7 triples. Drove in 73, swiped 27 bags, hit 314, 387, 515. He was an all-star. Manny Machado at third from 2015. He was worth 7.5 wins, 35 bombs. Great defense there at the hot corner. He was a gold glove and an all-star. And rounding out the infield, Miguel Tejada from 04. He was worth 7.4 wins, led the league with 150 RBIs, hit 34 home runs, 40 doubles, triple slash of 311, 360, 534. He was an all-star and a silver slugger. So Nick, what are your thoughts on these players that I've got here on the infield for the Orioles?
I tell you what, that is a stacked. I mean, I guess every team would probably have a stacked infield doing this, but honestly, if you go back and look at the last 25 years and you look at each of these positions, you could arguably say that each of these players is probably the best player at that position for the Orioles within this time frame. Matt Wieters. What's funny about Matt Wieters is that when he was picked, I want to say second overall out of Georgia Tech. That was kind of the first. He was kind of the first guy for me who kind of had this like uber prospect status, where he was supposed to show up and be a beast from day one. And playing catcher is probably one of the hardest things in sports over the stretch of 162 games. He was, what years? 2011. He was a Gold Glover, was an All-Star, 22 home runs. He had an OPS plus of 110, so he had, he was hitting the ball. He was hitting the ball better than a majority of his peers. Matt Wieters to me was kind of like the first domino of what was to eventually come over the next 4 or 5 years, which was solid, consistent play. He kind of tailored off over the last couple of years, and then he entered free agency. But playing catcher is going to do that to you, unfortunately. But no, I thinking about Wieters, you think about he was picked he's picked this high, he's going to be this good, and I kind of in an immature way kind of always viewed him as a disappointment. But looking back, with a little bit, you get a little bit wiser in your years, and then you realize that guy was really, really good playing probably the hardest position on the field. So I've grown to kind of accept him for what he was, and he was what he was really, really solid. Rafael Palmeiro, 1998. That is Rafi's still got maybe one of the top 5 sweetest left-handed swings, steroids and all. It kind of it kind of dampers it. But again, you're talking about 43 home runs, 121 driven in, slugging 565 with an OPS right around 950. And to me, when you said that he stole 11 bases, that I kind of took a step back there for a second. That kind of surprised me. Brian Roberts, I would argue that Brian Roberts is probably not in the same breath of what's the word I'm thinking of? Like the way that we view Brooks or one of these all timers. I wouldn't say he's in that class, but if there's a class right underneath it, Brian Roberts is like universally loved by Birdland. Everyone loves Brian Roberts. His speed, his speed power combo. He didn't have a ton of pop, but I think it might have been that 05 year where he came out and he hit like, he at one point was, in double digits in home runs way before he'd ever been. And so there were questions being asked, but Brian Roberts was to this day, he even does a little bit of broadcasting for the O's on Mass, and he's awesome. Brian Roberts will always be one of my favorite Orioles players. And speaking of favorite Orioles players, Manny Machado was again that shining light at the end. That the Orioles were capable of drafting really good players and having them come to the majors and still be really good players. At that point in time in 15, Machado was still very fleet of foot at third base. His range is kind of taken a little bit of a hit now as he's gotten a little bit bigger. But at that point in time, you're talking about he was in my mind the best third baseman in baseball. You can throw Arenado at that point in time. I don't think he'd taken the crown from him, but you're talking about Manny Machado, who in 15 must have still been 24, 25, still a super young guy. And then we have here, he hit 35 home runs. He had 86 driven in, stole 20 bags. I don't think you're going to see that from him anytime soon. But again, he was an all-around player, an absolute beast. And the impact that he had on the organization, he kind of was like, it was the first time in a long time the Orioles had a superstar, and they, someone that, everybody had on the back of their jersey or their jersey, whatever. He was the guy. And the Orioles are still kind of, aside from Trey Mancini at the moment, they're still kind of looking for that guy, that they can prop up in front of everybody. And then Miguel Tejada, to me, back in 03 when he signed, there was that offseason where they signed Miguel Tejada. I think Javi Lopez was in that package. I can't remember. There was one other guy they signed. I can't remember who it was, but that was kind of the offseason where they spent a little bit of money. And I knew Miguel Tejada from his athletics days. I loved his bat. He played awesome defense. And you rack up 7.5 wins by doing a lot of both. Led the league again. Looking at these, he led the league with 150 RBIs, which nowadays it's absurd. It's an absurd number.
Yeah.
He hit 311, had an OPS of 894, 34 bombs, 40 doubles. He had over 200 hits. Miggy was awesome. I wish the Orioles would have had him. Maybe not so much from the mid to the later side of his career, but when he was in his prime, I would have loved to have seen that him wearing an Orioles uniform. But yeah, that's looking back at this infield. It's like, these are all like top caliber guys for this organization at their position. And it's kind of funny how it just so happens to be, in my lifetime, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And then moving along to the outfield in left, I got Albert Bell from 99. He was worth about 3.5 wins. A lot of extra bases for him, 37 home runs, 37 doubles, drove in 117. Brady Anderson in center, his career year in 96 when he was worth just under 7 wins, 50 home runs, 110 driven in, 21 stolen bases, 297, 396, 637 triple slash. Led the league with 22 hit by pitches. Then in right field, we've got another Greek. This one, I think, a little more positive than Peter Angelos. Nick Markakis in 08. Great year for Markakis, worth 7.4 wins, 20 home runs, 48 doubles, 306, 406, 491 triple slash. Is great defense out there and right. And then at DH, Chris Davis in 2013. I know you mentioned him earlier in the program. Huge year in 2013, 53 home runs, 138 driven in, which both led the league. Also hit 42 doubles. Power came at a price. He did strike out 199 times, but 286, 370, 634 triple slash, led the league with 370 total bases. So I mean, got some nice pop in this outfield and DH spots.
Yeah, Albert Bell, was a little before my time, and Brady Anderson, again, he's still involved in the organization, very much looked upon within Orioles, the Orioles sphere as someone that people really still like. But Nick Markakis, I tell this to just about everybody. Nick Markakis is my favorite player of all time. He kind of, the way he goes about his business, or has gone about his business, as a hitter and as a fielder, everything about him I've always thought was, if I was to teach my kid how to play the game, I would want them to watch Nick Markakis, because he was a menace with two strikes. He was it was a super tough out. Had great range in right field. He was a pitcher back in his junior college days, so he was he was mid to upper 90s guy. So him throwing from the outfield, he threw with extreme velocity.
I think he even pitched for Greece in the 04 Olympics.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. And him also being a Nick is not a terrible thing as well. I always root for the Knicks. But you go back and you look at his Markakis's 2008 year. He had 99 walks to 113 strikeouts. That ratio is razor tight.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at guys, I always like to look at their strikeout to walk, and it kind of, it gives you a little bit of a background as to what they're trying to do at the plate. And you can tell, Nick had I would even argue, maybe not so much now, him kind of being on the decline, but he always had he's always had a great eye, was always really tough to strike out with two strikes. And then, you look at his 406 on base, which, if you're anywhere in the 400 range and you're on base, you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he is, to this day, Nick Markakis is probably going to be not a guy that a lot of people ever really remember or tout, but he's my favorite player of all time. And I think it's because when the Orioles were really, really bad in that stretch, when he first came up, he was kind of this just steady Eddie, solid guy that always put up numbers. And you're like, who the heck is Nick Markakis? And then all of a sudden, you get to 14 when they won the division. There's this moment after they beat the Blue Jays to clinch the division, him kind of hearing over the loudspeaker that the Orioles were AL East division champions. He looks up at the up at the sky, like, is this really happening? He's been through so many awful years, and to see it finally, come to fruition for him was just as awesome for him as it was for a lot of us. So Nick Markakis is very dear to my heart. And then you go to Chris Davis, and I can tell you that 2013 year, it seemed like every time he stepped up to the plate, he was going to hit one. It had that feeling where every time he walked up to the box, he was going to hit one. And it kind of, you hit 53 home runs, it kind of feels that way. But I know Chris Davis gets a lot of grief now, and it is what it is. But there was that time in 2013, and when he was as feared of a power hitter as anybody has ever been. I mean, looking at it, he slugged 634, had an OPS over 1,000, led the league in total bases. And even at that point in time, he was playing some really underrated defense at first base. So when he was in the field, but Chris Davis's name obviously garners a lot of ire now, but at the time, especially in that 2013 year. And I remember watching it when he hit the 50th. I believe it was actually against the Blue Jays when he hit 50. Seeing a guy on your team, on your favorite team, hit 50 bombs, it's like this plateau that even now you don't see that much. So it was a super big deal for me and for a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of teams don't even have a 50 homer guy in their history. So it's very impressive. And then as we get to the bench here, Jonathan Scope from 2017 played mostly second, a little bit of short there. He was worth 6.3 wins, 32 bombs, 35 doubles, 293, 338, 503 triple slash, lot of pop there. Renato Nunez from 2018. Played third, some just worth 1.4 wins there. Kind of a half season there, just 220 plate appearances, but he hit 275, 336, 445. Then Steve Pearce, who you mentioned earlier in the show, from 2014, he was worth 5.8 wins. The lefty masher hit 21 bombs, 26 doubles, 293, 373, 556 triple slash. Played first, and he played in the corner in the outfield. Then Charles Johnson as a backup catcher from 2000. Great defender there. He's worth 3.1 wins, hit 21 home runs that year, hit 294 that year for the O's. Any thoughts on any of these bench players here?
Yeah, Jonathan Scope actually has been one of my favorite players since he came into the league. His defense at second base is incredibly underrated. He's a ginormous second baseman in terms of height and in terms of bulk. He's just a big, solid guy. And that size, he used that size to his advantage at a position where you just don't see it. He was a super underrated slugger. You mentioned 30. We see 32 home runs and 105 driven in. He slugged 503, had an OPS of 841, which I will venture to guess to say was well above league average. And again, his ability to turn a double play at second base for a couple years was unrivaled. I mean, the guy had a mid-90s fastball if he wanted to. Super underrated guy. Renato Nunez, which is funny, is when he was let go earlier this offseason, it kind of there was a little bit of a divide between O's fans thinking, why are we letting this guy go? And you have the other side saying, this guy can't play any defense, we don't want him. But Renato Nunez was a waiver pickup in that year. 18 kind of signaling was kind of the first year of the teardown for the Orioles. He was it was a kind of a pleasant surprise. We won't talk about his defense because it's non-existent, but the guy could mash. And when he got a hold of one, they weren't cheap. I mean, he's a bona fide, no doubt about it. When he connects, I mean, they go 420. I mean, it's super raw power. Steve Pearce, I mentioned again, one of the most beloved cult figures in Orioles history. I'm confident when I say that. And then just to make myself happy, going back and looking at his 14 numbers, he had 21 home runs, 49 RBIs, which kind of shows you when he got up to the plate, and his most of his production came from the long ball, and he was again a waiver pickup, cut, let go, brought back, and looking at it, him slugging 556, which is crazy. Had an OPS at 930, even as like a kind of a platoon player. Steve Pearce was awesome, and he was integral to everything that happened that year. And just thinking about it now, the infamous Game 2 of the ALDS that year, when the Orioles were down 6-4 in the bottom of the eighth, and Steve Pearce kind of poked a single out over Ian Kinsler's head to keep the rally going, which ended up becoming the Delman Young double. He was part of that, and I don't have enough words to say about Steve Pearce. And then Charles Johnson again I remember Charles Johnson he was kind of this intimidating figure, and he had a cannon behind the plate, and then you look at his offense from a catching standpoint, hitting 294, 364, 570 with a 934 OPS, 21 bombs. You get that kind of production from the catching position, you're going to take it all day long. So yeah, I mean, even this bench, in considering what the Orioles have been over this stretch of time, that's a pretty solid roster for a team that wasn't very successful for much of it.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, a lot of big names there, especially on the infield. Huge numbers there, especially when you look at the WAR totals. As we get to the pitching staff, we'll start with the Hall of Famer Mike Mussina. Got his 1995 season. He led the league in wins as he went 19-9, ERA at 3.29, 7 complete games, and 4 shutouts. Those 4 shutouts led the league. Also stingy with the walk, just 2 walks per 9, which led the league. And he was a workhorse, over 220 innings, ERA plus of 145. Eric Bedard from 07. 5.8 wins. He went 13-5 with a 3.16 ERA, 221 strikeouts in just 182 innings. So those 10.9 strikeouts per 9 led the league, and also led the league at giving up just 7 hits per 9, ERA plus of 146. John Means from 2019 went 12-11 with a 3.6 ERA. He was worth 5 wins. Sidney Ponson from 03, he went 14-6 for the O's. And Jason Hamill from 2012, 8-6 ERA, under 3.5. He was worth 2.8 wins, but it was kind of an abbreviated season for him for the O's, just 20 starts. So when he was on the mound, he did very well. Thoughts on any of these pitchers?
Yeah, Mike Mussina obviously being the crown jewel of this group. Mm-hmm. Mussina, when I was a little kid, is kind of, when he was there, and at the time you think, this is what it's supposed to look like, like this is what you're supposed to have, and him eventually going to the Yankees is still, very, very much a sore subject. But Mussina, was the guy. The Orioles have not had a guy like Mussina since he left, and it's been he's essentially the model that you're trying to follow. And you go back and look at his numbers here. 200 innings. I couldn't tell you the last time an Orioles pitcher threw over 200 innings. He had an ERA plus of 145, well above league average. His WHIP was just over 1.0. He only walked 2 guys per 9, which led the league that year. It just goes to show you that Mussina was a guy that, he had the big fastball knuckle curve combo. He's essentially what the Orioles are trying to find now, and they've had a very difficult time, crossing that bridge. Eric Bedard, everyone kind of thought maybe this is the guy that could be the next Orioles number one atop the rotation. To Andy McPhail's credit, he made that trade that brought in the likes of Adam Jones and Chris Tillman and kind of helped to reshape the organization a little bit. But I do remember Eric Bedard had we're talking this 07 season right before he got traded. He was awesome, man. He had that big hook from the left side. He had a good he had a abnormally quick fastball from the left-handed side. 221 strikeouts, had an ERA plus of 146, even higher than Mussina. Led the league and, like you said, was only 7 hits per 9, was almost at 11 strikeouts per 9. The Orioles cashed in right at the right time, but yeah, I mean, it was they got the haul that they got because Bedard at that point in time was he was really, really good. And again, his departure kind of changed the way that kind of changed a lot of things for the Orioles. John Means of more present day history. I love John Means. I think John Means is primed for a massive 2021, and we're only 2 years removed from his 2019, where he was essentially between him and Trey Mancini. These guys are the bright spots of the team. 155 innings is obviously abbreviated, but that has a lot to do now, I think, more so with just the way teams manage innings. He had 121 strikeouts, 155 innings, so a little low, but he's never been a strikeout guy. He's being a lefty with a good changeup. He's trying to force you into weak contact. So that makes a lot of sense. But just looking at his overall numbers, he was an all-star. It's funny is when they're doing before every all-star game, when they do, they come out to each baseline, they introduce everybody. And John Means just kind of tips his hat up and looks around, and everyone's like, who the heck is this guy? But no, he's 2019 again was another year of, with a lot of losses. But when John Means took the bump every 5 days, it was appointment viewing for us, because you knew that guy was going to keep you in the game, and he was going to do it, with a lot of qualities that we hadn't seen in a while. Sidney Ponson, you wonder what would have happened if that guy just cared a little bit. He had every bit of talent in the world, and just could not quite put it all together. But you look at his 03, 14 wins at an ERA at 3.77. I remember Ponson had a good fastball. He was when he was on, man. He was fun to watch. And then you have Jason Hamill, who again was a piece in that wild card winning puzzle there in 2012. He had some really good days. He had some really bad days, but he found that middle ground there with a 3.43 ERA. Annie even had he had a FIP of 3.29, which suggests that he even had a little bit more in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Jason Hamill was a really just one of those guys that kind of that might have been just maybe his 1 or 2 years there for where he kind of put it together, and he did it with the Orioles, and he did it for a team that really was searching for arms and needed somebody. Jason Hamill was a really, really solid guy. So yeah, while that pitching staff might not doesn't have the big names or nothing, but they have had their moments, and I looking at these names here, these were all guys that definitely had their moments, as an Oriole.
Mm-hmm. And then as we get into the bullpen, so here's a guy who definitely had some great moments there. In 97, Randy Myers, he was worth 3.1 wins, ERA 1.5. He led the league with 45 saves, struck out just under a batter an inning. He was an all-star there for the O's. Buddy Groom in 02, another lefty. He was worth almost 3 wins, went 3-2 with a 1.6 ERA out of the pen there for the O's. at a ERA plus. I know this is with especially relievers, you're not facing as many batters, so the ERA plus can be a little deceiving since they don't have that huge body of work. But ERA plus of 270 there for Buddy Groom, which is huge. Mike Trombley in 01 is worth about a win. ERA of about 3.5 in 54 and 2/3 innings there for the O's. George Sherrill, the lefty from 09. He was worth 1.7 wins, ERA of 2.4, 20 saves for the Orioles. I think that was before he got dealt to the Dodgers there in 09. Koji Uehara from 2010, 286 ERA there out of the pen, 13 saves, struck out, 55 guys in just 44 innings. So a lot of Ks for Uehara. Chris Ray from 06, worth 2 wins, 2.73 ERA, 33 saves there for Ray. Then finishing up with Zach Britton from 2016, huge year from Britton, 2-1 out of the pen, microscopic ERA of about half a run. Led the league, finishing 63 games, and led the league with 47 saves, ERA plus of 803, which, I mean, again, with relievers, ERA plus, it's, not the best measure, but I mean, 803 is just eye popping. His FIP was 194. It's just, I mean, when you gave the ball to Britton, I think he was perfect that year in saves, I want to say.
Yeah, he was 47 for 47.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you want and more out of your closer. I mean, throwing that bowling ball up there and just getting ground ball after ground ball, but also striking out a ton. He struck out almost 10 batters per 9 innings. So yeah, any thoughts on Britton and the rest of this bullpen?
Yeah, just to touch on Britton, that 16 season was, when you're 47 for 47, obviously you're perfect and you come in, you do your job, game over. But the way that he did it, with that sinker, I think he threw that pitch, having done a little bit of research in the past, I want to say he probably threw it like 93% of the time. So, I mean, you knew what was coming. It's a lot like Mariano Rivera or Kenley Jansen,
Mm-hmm.
You know what's coming. You know exactly what he's going to throw, and you still can't hit it because that pitch is so good. I mean, that his sinker moved. It had 2 planes of movement. I mean, even now it's still an unbelievable pitch, even though it might not have the kind of success that it had in that 16th season. But 67 innings, an ERA of 0.54. Just going on here and looking, he had a whip of 0.83. He only hit the home run per 9 of 0.1. So I think he may have someone might have lucked into one at some point. I mean, it just goes to show you what he was doing. What's funny about Britton is that, he was one of these guys at the time where he was, in the likes of Jake Arrieta, a couple of these other guys who were like failed starters. Orioles trade Arrieta. He obviously goes and wins a Cy Young. The World Series has some success. Britton got moved to the pen. Wasn't the 96 to 97, was more of a 91, 92, 93 guy. But once he got to the pen, he could rear back for an inning and just let that thing rip. Mm-hmm. And that pitch, I mean, you watch it on TV, it doesn't physically, it doesn't look right. It's just, that's where all that success came from. George Sherrill to me was, he was in that Adam Jones trade coming to Baltimore. He was I think he was pretty sneaky solid from the left-hand side. I remember there was one game at Wrigley that just being stuck in my brain. He I can't remember if he loaded the bases or he came into with the bases loaded, but nobody out at Wrigley. I think they had a 1 or 2 run lead, and he goes and strikes out the side. It was it was just one of those things that you remember thinking, well, great, they're going to find another way to blow it. And he comes in and he strikes out the side, and you're like, holy crap, did that just happen? So that, George Sherrill was very, very solid at a time when they really were searching for just about anything. I can't really touch on Randy Myers, Buddy Groom, or Trombley, just because they were at that time, just being a little kid, they were, relievers come and go. But Koji Uehara, I think, probably was very underrated. He would throw anything at you in any count. Had kind of that, as most guys that come from Japan and, Korea, Taiwan, all these guys, kind of had that funky delivery, really hit the ball well. But yeah, he threw that nasty split change that really screwed with a lot of hitters. I'll always be a big Koji fan, and he was, I think, he obviously didn't speak great English, but whatever. But you could tell that the guy was, just from seeing him on the field and the way he was with his teammates, he seemed like a really cool guy, like someone I'd totally want to hang out with. And then Chris Ray was kind of had this real herky-jerky sidearm delivery. He threw really hard. And again, was one of those guys at that point in time where the Orioles were really bad, but he provided, he gave you something to watch because he was able to perform at a level that a lot of his peers were not. So this bullpen obviously is very top heavy with Britton, but that's just a signal of where the organization has been over the last 25 years or so.
Yeah, there you have it. There we got the Orioles roster that I've assembled with some great comments there from Nick there. So that's what we've got for the Orioles for the past quarter century. Nick, every episode we go over the misses that I had, guys who maybe could have or should have been on the roster. When you put these, the try to get the pieces of the puzzle to fit, you're unfortunately not able to get everyone you want. So, now we talk about the guys who missed the cut. Do any names pop out at you for not being on this roster? Would you have, expected anybody else to be on the roster?
So I think that probably like 95% of what you assembled, I would entirely agree with. And I would even, I really have a hard time taking anybody out. The only names I would say that I would probably argue or debate over would have been Melvin Mora back in that 03, 04, 05 range as an infielder. But Miguel Tejada and Brian Roberts obviously take the cake there. And Jay Gibbons, there was that 3 year stretch where Jay Gibbons was kind of a masher, which ended up being steroid related, but yeah, he had a couple years there. I think he was kind of in the rookie of the year conversation as a Rule 5 waiver guy, if I remember correctly. He was a big, that big bat from the left side did some good things, but and then on the pitching side, I think the only name that I would maybe throw, a couple names I would throw out there are Chris Tillman and who was I just thinking of? Chris Tillman and Rodrigo Lopez, who was kind of in the rookie of the year conversation there. I want to say like 03, 04, 05, that range. But I mean, again, the Orioles have not been very good for this much of this chunk of time. So finding guys that stand out is really difficult. And certainly, there's certainly some names up for debate, but I think the roster that you put together is pretty much spot on.
Yeah, Melvin Mora was definitely, I think, the name that popped out the most. Yeah, he had some big years there. Versatile fielder, would have been nice to have on the roster, but yeah, for one reason or another, just it seemed like there were some better options in each of those years. Brian Roberts, I know, was one of them in '05. Sidney Ponson in '03. I guess, I needed a starting pitcher. You take him out there and you get more there. You got to
There's
find
not a lot of there's not a lot to pick from.
Yeah, that's the tough part. But Melvin Moore, I think, was the biggest. Had the most production of guys who missed the roster. Then a couple other names who you've mentioned earlier in the program at various points, who were also very good for the Orioles. Adam Jones and JJ Hardy. But again, Hardy playing short. As you mentioned, Tejada, huge year there in '04. So it's tough to find room for him. And Brady Anderson's year in '96 was going to be the year for a center fielder. But Adam Jones had some solid years there for the O's. And then even though it was in the twilight of his career, you got to mention Cal Ripken Jr. I kind of, when I did the Padres roster, I had Gwynn on there. I felt the Padres roster would have been incomplete without Gwynn, even though it was in the tail end of his career and not his best years. I can make the same argument for Ripken with this team. Because as you mentioned earlier, he's like, maybe the pinnacle of the Orioles players. So again, even though it was the twilight of his career, I could have thrown him on there. I bet if, an Orioles fan were to do this, they might, for sentimental reasons, put Ripken on the roster.
Yeah, but I like you've done, you've included all the numbers here. It's from a pure number standpoint. I don't think you're going to find a whole lot of, you're not going to argue with, I'm not going to be able to argue it with you because it is what it is,
Yeah, I think the most difficult year I had was '01. I think they were pretty weak in '01. Not a lot of great years. I got, Mike Trombley in '01, who was okay out of the pen, but not great. That was a tough one. But yeah, it's a fun project. And again, any Orioles fans listening want to put together an Orioles roster, you can visit the website boxseatbanter.com. There's a link to download a template off of Google Spreadsheets. You can fill out your own roster. If you're listening and you're critiquing mine, go ahead and take a shot yourself. It is a fun project. And again, if you have those critiques, also let me hear them. The inbox is open. You got a problem with this, or also if you want to compliment me on what a great job I did, you can also let me know that way. But yeah, I would love to hear any comments. And if you do go ahead and make a roster, go ahead, submit that. I would love to see any rosters that the listeners make out there. Okay, Nick, every week we open it up for some questions from the listeners on social media. So make sure to follow there to get your questions in. It's at Boxseat Banter, both Twitter and Instagram. Alfredo Papadakis asks, did Chris Davis have the greatest single season of any Orioles player in the last 25 years? Why or why not?
Single greatest season over the last 25 years. I think in terms of numbers, it'd be incredibly hard to disagree with that. We're talking about that 13 year, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like I said before, like when he walked up to the plate, I'm the kind of guy that watches probably 150 games out of 162 because that's just the way I am. So I can tell you from firsthand experience, I watched almost every at bat he had, and he had there was this intimidation factor because either guys would try to pitch him way outside or they would try to jam him. I mean, he hardly ever saw anything straight down the middle. And he did the things that he did were just incredible. I mean, he hit, there was a ball, I want to say it might've been 13, but the lasting memory I have of Chris Davis was he was facing Pat Venditti, the
ambidextrous. Yeah.
And Pat Venditti threw him this massive left-handed slider from that down low arm angle that he had, and Chris Davis leaned out into the right-handed batter's box, one-handed, flipped the ball 360 feet, just scraped over that right center field wall in Camden Yards for a walk-off home run. And it was just so like those kinds of things that he did that year were just incredible. And we had, me being an Orioles fan my whole life had never, as getting into adulthood, had never seen it before. It was just the kind of stuff that makes you like baseball. And I would venture to, I'd probably say from a number standpoint and from just a pure impact standpoint that he probably did have the best season that an Oriole has had in those 25 years.
Yeah. What other seasons do you think are in the conversation with that? I mean, I think, Brady Anderson's year 96 to 50 bombs is up there. I don't know what Machado's best season would be if it was this 2015 that I got him, maybe. Any other top seasons do you think are in the conversation?
I think the only other one right off the top of my head that I would put in that category would be Zach Britton's 16.
Yeah, that's a good case there.
Because the Orioles never, just the way history is unraveled, it's really hard to pick and choose a guy that was, that was like, this is the best, this is the best. And it's so clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
The Orioles just don't have that. So I would probably say that Davis from the offensive side. And then you want to talk about Britton, even as a closer, who only, who threw an inning, maybe an inning plus, that those two seasons are probably the two that stand out to me, especially as I've gone from childhood to, adulthood. Those two really stand out to me, having had the most success / impact on the team that year.
Okay. And then I've got one for you. So you say, I know you write for Pitcher List. You get some fantasy look at baseball. So I know you mentioned John Means as a guy who you think is going to have a big 2021. What guys on the O's roster do you think are kind of sleeper picks or guys that we should be looking out for in fantasy?
So again, yeah. So the current Orioles right now are interesting. We don't know a lot about them yet, other than the John Means, the Trey Mancini's, even though he's coming back from colon cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that those two are probably the most obvious choices. A name I would throw out there as being a sleeper or someone that you could probably pick up really late in drafts, depending on the kind of draft that you're in, or someone that I would maybe keep an eye on the waiver wire, is Austin Hayes, who I would presume is going to play center field, is going to start in center field this year. He's going to have to, supposedly there's a battle between him and Cedric Mullins for the center field spot, but I don't see Mullins beating him out. Hayes is a power speed guy who's had a little bit of swing and miss issues coming up from the minor leagues and even with the big club. He likes to swing because he's got a lot of pop. And I think he's a guy that could really provide some under the radar power. He's got big time wheels. I think the Orioles traditionally don't run much, even after Buck Showalter wasn't a big stolen base guy. The Orioles haven't been as much, a little bit more in recent years, but still not much. But I can see Hayes being a guy that does provide you that could provide you with some numbers in the stolen base category. Excuse me. Hayes being one guy. I'm thinking around the infield here. Ryan Mountcastle. I think Ryan Mountcastle is absolutely legit. Again, another guy that's a big time free swinger, but his bat to ball skills are so good. He showed it in a very brief period of time this last summer when he came up. He's got the potential. He looks like an impact bat. I think he will be. It just will probably take realistically, I would expect probably 2021 to be some growing pains, but there will be some moments, and I think we'll know more about him. We'll know a lot more about him this year because he's going to be playing every day. And then just as a name, another name to throw out there, thinking from the starting side, Dean Kramer, who the Orioles got in the Manny Machado trade with the Dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
Dean Kramer looks like he's going to be. He's got the look of a guy that's going to fit in the top third of their top three 3/5 of their rotation this year and potentially for the next few years. He's a big, strong 6'3" guy with the kind of fastball that doesn't sit flat, even though it's 93, 94. It's not super premium velocity, but he can run it up there from 95 to 96 at times. He's got a massive hook, a changeup that is somewhat underrated. He's got a slider as well, but Dean Kramer he's going to sit in that rotation. And I think with opportunity, I think he's going to be someone that people need to keep an eye on because I think he's got some stuff that the Orioles haven't had in a long time.
All right, there we go. Some good advice. And if, make sure to save some of that good advice for me off the air.
Hey, Billy, I got you, man.
All right. And again, remember, follow on social media, get those questions in each week. We have looked at the roster, dissected it, talked about, all the players and the numbers that they put up. So Nick, now let's grade this roster. And again, we are grading it in comparison to all the other rosters that I've created and how it would do against all of them. So, I know I have the advantage of having all the information, all of the stats and the spreadsheets and everything. But Nick, how would you think it would do? What are some strengths and weaknesses of this roster, and what letter grade would you assign it?
So I think the most obvious point of strength would definitely be the infield.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're looking at from a pure power standpoint, especially coming from the middle infield, the Manny Machado obviously stands out.
Mm-hmm.
Miguel Tejada in that 2004 year, like we said, 34 home runs, 150 ribbies, like that is hitting 311, like just an absurd year. I think the infield here is really where the Orioles kind of stand out. The outfield is again more power based with Bell and Anderson. Markakis, I think, looking at this, provides you with a little something different. Chris Davis being the DH, I don't think you're going to get a whole lot better than that 2013 season that he had. Obviously you can, from a historical standpoint, you can pick and choose some guys that would probably have some better numbers, but considering what the Orioles have been and what they've had, to have a guy slot in at DH with 53 home runs and 138 ribs, you're looking pretty solid right there. The bench, again, some sneaky good guys between Scope and Pierce. The staff is Musina top heavy. John Means obviously stands out. Eric Bedard really cashed in there when he was with the Orioles in that 2007 year, was really, really good. And then, but aside from Britton, and this isn't your fault, but there's just not a whole lot of guys to pick from aside from him. So, looking at it from top to bottom, the lineup, the offense really, I think, elevates it. And then you have to, but you can't help but look at a chunk of the starting rotation and much of the bullpen and really be overwhelmed by it. But I tell you what, the Orioles were probably a lot harder to pick from than a lot of other teams So kudos to you for you know for being able to do that. But from like an overall general standpoint, just as a me trying to stack this team up with other organizations over the past 25 years, I'd probably give them a solid B minus, somewhere in there, because there's a lot of good, but I think the where the Orioles are were really challenged, they just are going to they have a really hard time stacking up with in terms of a pitching standpoint. So I think the offense is obviously really good, but aside from a couple arms, it's just lacking, and that's just it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree with you there. They got some, decent defense and got some pop. You got some big hitters in the lineup. I know as we went through the infield, you mentioned, how great those guys were, but then you kind of also said that, if you kind of do this for any team in the past 25 years, you probably got to get some big names, but that Orioles infield is impressive, even comparing it to the other infields that I've got. And they are offensively, they're above average. I'm comparing them to the other teams, but like you mentioned, the pitching is where they kind of fall behind. The starting pitching is lacking. Some of the other teams are able to put, pretty solid rotations together, that are kind of similar to the great infield that the O's have here. Some teams have some dominant pitching staffs. So I think that, there's not as much innings from the pitching staff, the starters as a group. The pen is decent. When you've got a guy like Britton at the back end, that's a great place to start. So that helps. He can cover up some of the weaker spots. Then Randy Myers had a great year there in 97. Chris Ray was solid there in 06. So they've got some decent arms in the pen, but not super deep. So I think, the pitching staff as a whole is below average. And then even though you compare that or combine it with the slightly above average offense, I think they're kind of like C minus, D plus. I'll give them a C minus. I hope the listeners at Camden Chat don't get too mad at me for the slightly below average grade there for the O's. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's, some of the years has been pretty difficult, pretty lean. I think that it's, pretty impressive. They've had what, 5 playoff appearances in the quarter century. So to have a decent, I think C minus is a pretty solid grade, considering the unfortunate lack of success on the field there for the Orioles.
Yeah, I think your grade is much more realistic than mine. Me being a homer, trying to elevate it is just enough. But yeah, I would probably fall somewhere. I think more realistically, probably fall somewhere in that low C to high C range, like you mentioned.
Yeah, that's, a lot of times my grade does not exactly line up with my guest, who's usually a fan of said team. So you're definitely not alone in that. And it's hard to say how it would actually play out on the field. It's fun to discuss it, but yeah, that's the way I'm rolling with it. And if any Orioles fans at Camden Chat or elsewhere want to again chime in with their grade for this roster and let me know why it should be higher, you can do so. Let me hear your opinions on those grades. Nick, it's been fun talking about the Orioles with you for the past little bit. So as we finish up here, what are your final thoughts that you want to share about the Orioles?
Well, Billy, first off, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate, like I said, I appreciate any opportunity I get to talk O's baseball, because, I live in the middle of Kansas, and there's just not a lot of O's fans to talk with. So this is nice and refreshing for me. But what I would say is that, though the Orioles, we look at this roster over the last 25 years, and there's some good names, and there's some, you having to plug spots in with some guys that probably wouldn't make a whole lot of other teams, because the Orioles have been not very good, since I've been alive. So what makes me happy though is that, I look at where the organization is headed now, and I think that there's some really, really good days ahead. Hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. But Fangraphs putting out the Orioles getting a 0.0% chance making the playoffs, which to me is crazy, because I think you have a chance just by participating in this. Like you have a chance. To say that they have no chance, while probably right, is they're not going to make the playoffs this year, but to say that they have a 0% chance just bugs me a little bit. But give the Orioles a chance. If you get a chance to watch, they have some very interesting guys that are going to be coming up to the team this year. The last couple of years were development. 2021 is going to be the start of where we start to see what the development looks like. So the wins and losses are not going to be to where we'd like, or, to what a fan would associate with being, worth watching. But they're going to have some good players. There's going to be some interesting guys. If all else, watch Trey Mancini coming back from colon cancer and returning to being a fixture in a lineup where he's the most popular player in the clubhouse is going to be worth watching. But if you get an opportunity to tune in, please do, because I promise you, there are some guys on that team that are certainly worth watching, and I think they'll prove that to you in 2021.
Yeah, Trey Mancini, definitely a great story, and definitely a guy that every fan across baseball, can root for. You love seeing him overcome that obstacle, going through the treatment, getting into remission, and getting back on a playing field. Huge accomplishment there from Mancini, to someone that I think everyone is rooting for this year. When I look at the Orioles, I like to look at things just what could have been sometimes, if something small just went a different way. And I know we talked about it earlier with that Tarasco fly ball there that Jeter hit in '96. I don't want to bring back, open up, old wounds here for Orioles fans, but I wonder,
as a child.
I wonder, what that alternate history would have been, if the correct call was made and out on the field. Do the O's win that game? Do they win that series? Are they the team there in the late '90s and early 2000s? Do the Yankees go on to win all those World Series titles? I don't know. It's something that would be fun to think about. It's fun to discuss. The O's, they had a good season in '97, but then after that, they weren't really heard of. They were kind of non-factors for like a decade and a half. And now they've got their work cut out for them in the AL East. The Yankees are the Yankees. They're going to spend. The Red Sox are also a big market. Toronto's another big market that's going for it. And the Rays are a small market, but they're very efficient in what they do. So the O's have got their work cut out for them there in that competitive AL East. But hopefully the Angelo Suns can bring some pride to the Greeks and put a winning product out there on the field in Baltimore at beautiful Camden Field. So yeah, Nick, as we finish up here again, I want to thank you for joining, sharing your knowledge, your passion and enthusiasm for the Orioles. So again, thanks for joining the program.
You're the man, Billy. I appreciate you having me.
All right. This is Billy Ballas of Box Seat Banter signing off.